Hey there, today I'm going to be benchmarking the AMD Radeon HD 7850. This graphics card has a whopping 1GB of GDDR5 VRAM. According to Tech PowerUp, it has 2GB of VRAM, but according to GPU-Z and Task Manager and MSI Afterburner, it has 1GB. So I'm not sure what's up with that. This graphics card was released in March of 2012. It had a launch price of around $250. The CPU I'm pairing this with is a rather decent one. It is the Intel Xeon E3 1230. It's a lower end 4-core 8-thread CPU. I'm also pairing it with either 16 or 24GB of DDR3 RAM. I was using 16GB, but later on I found that wasn't enough, so I upgraded it to 24GB. Today I'm going to be benchmarking it in 12 games, so without further ado, let's jump right in. So the first game I'm testing is CSGO 2, or Counter-Strike Global Offense 2, or CSGO, or I don't know, the new version. I was playing at 1080p on the low settings, and I was using FSR quality. And being a 1GB graphics card, I thought, oh, this 4-core 8-thread Xeon will be plenty to max out this. Nope, not even close. It was mostly a CPU bottleneck the entire time, but the game was getting 68 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 29, so not great, far from it. It might get a little bit better with a faster CPU, but I don't really think it's realistic to have really a much faster CPU than this in the first place hooked up to this graphics card. So, in the new CSGO, people seem to be absolute professionals. I died 65 times and got 12 kills. The first place person got 93 kills and died only like 32 times. The next game is Cyberpunk 2077, and I tried 1080p, it didn't go well, so this is 720p on the absolute lowest settings, not the low preset. I manually set everything to the lowest because the low preset isn't actually the lowest settings. And it was actually impressive, sort of. So the game often did drop into the low 20s in the frame rate. It dropped to around 23, but the average came out to 34 frames per second with a 1% low of 6 frames per second. And this is 720p, lowest settings with ultra performance FSR. So it's like 360p basically. So is it playable? Not really, but I guess it kind of is okay-ish, question mark. Yeah, pretty impressive for a 1GB graphics card. Apex Legends at 1080p on the low settings was getting 57 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 38. So even the 1% lows weren't in the 30s. Well, no, they were in the 30s, but they weren't in the 20s, which is pretty impressive, especially because, again, this only has 1GB of VRAM. And Apex Legends isn't really a bad looking game, especially at low settings. It's not bad. I mean, you know, it's not amazing, but it's low settings. It doesn't look like low settings. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm just kind of, my mind's blown up from this, but that's fine. Very impressive. BattleBit Remastered is a extremely well optimized game, and well, that shows here. Either way, the game got 167 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 121. And I was playing at 1080p on the potato settings with 100% resolution scale. Also, this was a complete CPU bottleneck, and the graphics card had quite a bit more power to spare. I didn't use the higher presets because they look about the same in terms of visual quality, and well, let's get the best frame rate possible, because why not? BeamNG Drive at 1080p on the custom low settings, meaning everything was set to its lowest except the mesh quality and the shadows. So yeah, the textures were as low as they could go, but at least we have shadows, which makes the game look quite a bit better. The game didn't get 30 plus FPS at all times. It did drop into the 20s, like around the forest area, and in downtown, I don't know what the downtown name is, it's West Coast USA in the big city. It was dropping into the upper 20s, but the average frame rate, it was 39. The 1% low is only 26. That is not bad. Again, this is a 1GB graphics card. I was expecting far worse, but then again, I don't have any actual gaming 1GB graphics cards. This is the first one I've ever got my hands on. The next game on the list is Call of Duty Warzone 2.0. I was playing at 1080p on the minimum settings with FSR set to Ultra Performance, or the most performance FSR mode, whatever that is. Either way, the game, first of all, was giving me a warning saying the graphics card has a low amount of VRAM. Then it gave me another warning saying the graphics card drivers are old and I need to update them, even though this is the most up-to-date graphics card driver. Either way, the game got horrible frame rate. When I was in the game, I was getting a whopping, wait for it, 13 frames per second on average, with a 1% low of 11. Yes, 13. Yes, if I went over and lowered the resolution, the frame rate went slightly up, but it didn't really improve even at 720p. It's just horrible all the way around. It probably is because of the 1GB of VRAM. The game was saying it needed something like 3GB of VRAM, and I only have 1GB, so that's fine. Yeah. Dying Light 1 at 1080p on the low settings was actually impressive. So the game itself actually looks quite nice on the low settings, so I would expect, oh, this game's probably going to run pretty badly. It's going to run like Cyberpunk or Call of Duty. Call of Duty doesn't even look that good, but, you know, it'll probably run worse than that because the game looks so good. And no, that's not how it works. The game got 49 frames per second on average and had a 1% low of 34. And that's not using FSR or anything. FSR is not in the game. This game is extremely well optimized. Why can't new games be like this? This is awesome. Fall Guys is very impressive, so the game looks great. Well, I mean, it's not the best looking game on earth, the textures are very, very simple, but that doesn't mean it looks bad. It's a very good looking game, and all with it looking good and being simple, it actually runs amazingly. It got 51 frames per second with a 1% low of 41, and that's at 1080p on the medium settings. If the settings were actually set too low, it would probably get 60 plus FPS, but I don't see a reason for it. On medium settings, it still gets a very good frame rate, and that's, I mean, it has 1GB of VRAM and is playing most games here that are even actually modern. I don't know. I'm still impressed in this thing. Fortnite at 1080p on the low settings with DirectX 11, the game was getting a glorious 15 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 3. Yes, 15. Now you might be thinking that is horrible, and you are right. Though something extremely weird happened when I set the game to performance mode, because it actually is performance-y. Performance-y? It made it run better. At 1080p on the low settings with performance mode enabled, not DirectX 11 or 12, it's performance mode, the game ran quite a lot better. It was getting 96 frames per second on average. Yes, it went from 15 to 96 frames per second. That is a huge improvement. The 1% low went from 3 to 11. Sure, the 1% low is still horrible, but Fortnite is known to be stuttery, and I mean, hey, at least it's getting a high average frame rate, even if it's extremely stuttery. So, not half bad, it's not great, it's not bad, it's kind of in between. Grand Theft Auto 5 at 1080p on the low settings with shadows and grass set to high. The game was getting an average frame rate of 87 with a 1% low of 59. That is actually really impressive. The reason it's impressive is because, well, it's a very wide open game. There's a lot of land. The world is huge, and yet it's running this good on a graphics card with 1GB of VRAM. That is pretty impressive. Sure, the game was on the low textures, or technically it's considered normal, so the textures weren't amazing, but it wasn't that bad either. It was just kind of alright in terms of the textures. If I turn the textures up, it probably will stutter, so that's why I left them on low, since the VRAM is already maxed out. Minecraft Bedrock Edition at 1080p on the medium settings got an average frame rate of 170 with a 1% low of 39. This isn't really a graphics card test though. The CPU was actually the limiting factor here by a significant amount. The graphics card was only around 30% usage. Either way, this was at 16 chunks render distance. If I wanted, I could make the render distance a lot more, but that would just make it more CPU intensive. Minecraft Java Edition 1.20 with the complementary shaders set to the potato preset was getting an average frame rate of around 45, which is, well, again, very impressive, being that this is, well, you've heard it from me too many times already. Either way, that is very nice. It is actually playable, which is far exceeding my expectations here. With the settings I normally use on complementary shaders, it kind of walks, it gets around 15 to 20 frames per second, but on the potato settings, it still looks really nice, and yeah, about 40 to 45 frames per second. Portal ran, well actually it's pretty clear how it ran. It's a very old game, it's very easy to run, so with all that stuff combined with this graphics card being actually not that big of a potato, we've got 177 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 112. In other words, it is amazing. Rocket League at 1080p on the very high settings ran very good. It was getting 93 frames per second on average and it had a 1% low of 40. Overall, that is as well a very good result, especially because it's the very high settings. Yes, very high. Not low, not medium, not high. It's very high. So not bad at all, especially since the game is actually looking good. This is normally conclusion time, but I don't know what kind of conclusion to get. I mean, 1 GB of VRAM is absolutely not enough for any new game, but for older games it's enough. These graphics cards are selling for about $25 on eBay, which seems like a lot, but I can't really find anything that is exactly cheaper that performs better. But I'm sure there is actually cheaper things that perform better. I just don't know what they are. So I recommend doing your research before buying this if you're going to be buying this graphics card, because $25 for it seems like quite a bit. Being that I got a GTX 980 Ti for $60. Either way, yeah, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it was somewhat informative, and I'll see you again next time.